Thank you, Frida. This church is so loaded with wisdom and beauty and sass. We appreciate it. I want to thank Janice and the team that's putting together this awesome reception for April and I. It took April and I about 8 years after meeting to have our first date in 2004. And then it took us only a little over 10 years to finally get engaged. So we've been going for quite a while, but it's so important for us to get married in this church and to invite everyone here on November 25th at 4, because it was really getting to be of service at this church together, which I think really bonded us and revealed something that was a marriage. And so I don't think we'd be together quite in the way that we are without the folks in the community here, and we're so grateful to you. So we're really looking forward to that, and we hope you can make it. It speaks well with our theme of service today. So we're in the middle of our pledge campaign, which we're calling the Ease of Giving, which is about it being easy to give to the church, but it's also about some great E words, and today's word is embracing. And did everyone get their soap? Okay, is everyone feeling extra clean this morning? So we have an embracing quote on here today that I'd like to share with you to get us going this morning. It's from Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker mystic and political activist, a really smart guy. He said, "Embracing one's wholeness makes life more demanding, because once you do that, you must live your whole life." I really like that quote because it dispels what to me is kind of a stereotype of some of us in our teaching, which kind of says that we're kind of just denying the negative in our lives and just trying to be positive all the time. That we're just making up all these affirmations about ourselves in life that are hopeful at best, just trying to get through. There's this stereotype of the religious scientist, which is our denomination. But to me, it's actually really hard to be in this teaching, perhaps even more difficult than some others. In this teaching, we talk about having a mystical experience, a opening of our hearts to a transcendent power. Other faiths teach that too. But a lot of other faiths, they talk about following a code or a doctrine or some rules, which is wonderful, and you follow those things and they bring you closer to God. And in our teaching, we teach the importance of responsibility. That it's not so much about following a particular code, it's about recognizing that you yourself are responsible for what you think. You yourself are responsible for the world as you experience it. You yourself are responsible for how you choose to behave and act in the world. And I think some people, when they learn that in this faith, that it's not just warm and foo-foo and feeling one with a greater power, but it means sometimes facing that part of ourselves that maybe denied taking responsibility for our lives. It's not easy. It's not always a loving path. Sometimes it's a painful one, a hurtful one, especially when we have to face what may be for many of us decades of self-beratement, of judgments about life that we use perhaps to solidify our role of being a victim of it, of putting down others in order to get some sensibility of lifting ourselves up so that we can feel better. I love something that the Buddhist teacher Sherry Huber once said. She said, "Here is my wish for you and every other child, woman, and man on the face of the earth. Spend 1 week saying only kind, caring things to yourself. Say thank you at least 10 times an hour. Direct 5 toward yourself and 5 to the world at large. Compliment yourself and others each time an effort is made. Notice all the wonderful qualities and characteristics about yourself and those around you. 1 week, you will never go back, and your whole life will be a glorious meditation." Those are powerful words, and they sound simple, but isn't that kind of hard to be nice to yourself for a whole week? I know many of you here that are capable of it, but I don't know if I always am, because it's so easy for me sometimes to slip back into a life that doesn't know I'm whole. It's so easy to start living a life that's irresponsible again. But again, I think Palmer's right. Embracing your wholeness means living your whole life? And that's a great question for each of us. Am I living my whole life? Am I living my whole life? It's our pledge campaign, which is about securing funds for the church, but it's also about celebrating our church community. And so it always brings to mind the question for me, why come here? Why come to church? Why come to a spiritual community, whether it's here or someplace else? I think some people come here because they're in a time of transition, maybe a time of challenge in their lives, and so they want a sense of spiritual anchor. They wanted to rediscover their spiritual source again so they can get back to the changes of life. Then there are those who want to come here because they want a place for their kids to learn good virtues and values, and thankfully the minister doesn't go on and on and on too much. So this is a good place to go. Then there are those who just want to see their friends and want to be around people, and they don't care what the church calls itself. It's warm and the hugs are good. Edison brings donuts that taste delicious. Amen. Amen. Well, we finally get an amen in church, and it's for the donuts. But for me, I know that I come to this church to remind myself of my wholeness and to get back on track of living a whole life. Because I don't know about you, but I slip sometimes. Before I know it, I can find myself disrespecting or berating myself again. Before I can know it, I can find myself mistreating someone that I really love and value. Before I know it, I'm back into those judgments and limited beliefs about life that are securing or building up that victim role. And so when I come here, I'm reminded not only that I'm whole, but that the responsibility of being whole is living a whole life. That's why I come here. The key to me of really getting to feel whole, the thing I love most about it, and the thing I think that secures for me a feeling of wholeness is another thing that I get to do here, and that's be of service. I don't think that you can live a whole life without being in service in some way. And the greatest gift I have ever been given is the opportunity to be of service. For me, I get the great service here of getting up to speak. But that's not the only way to be of service. I love holding the door open. I love handing out a program. I love just listening to someone and affirming their truth, even though they're going through a challenge. There's all sorts of different levels of service. But I think if you really want to embrace a larger life, you can only really do so through service. If you really want to embrace your wholeness in a more profound way, you can only really do it through service. There's a story about a Zen teacher who lived in the 16th century. His name was Tetsugin. And he had a dream to take the sutras of the Buddha and to print them on these wood blocks. Sutras in Buddhism are like their scriptures. So he'd say, Buddha loves me, yes I know, for the sutra tells me so. In our Buddhist Sunday school. And so this gentleman had this dream to raise enough money to put these sutras on wooden blocks. And he raised some big donations from some people, mostly little donations. And 10 years into his project, he finally had enough money to get started. Just at that time, there was a great flood in the land. And what followed that was a great famine, and people were starving. And so the man decided to take his money and feed the people. And there he was at square one again. So he started collecting money so he could again fulfill his dream of printing the sutras. 5 years in this time, instead of 10, he had the money that he needed. But just then, there was a plague that hit his village. And there was a great amount of disease that followed. And so he decided to spend his money in order to get medicine to help his people. Finally, 5 years again later, he had enough money, 20 years of raising funds. He finally had the money and had printed on these beautiful wood blocks the great sutras of the Buddha, which legend says are still on display in Japan. And when parents show the sutras to their children, they say there are 3 sets of sutras. What you are seeing is the third. The first 2 are invisible, and they are the most important. It's a powerful story, right? It reminds us that one's religion or one's spirituality isn't necessarily what they believe. If you really want to know what someone's religion is, look at how they live their life, right? If you really want to know how spiritual you are, don't look at how flowery your language is, but how you treat yourself, how you treat others, how you live your life. And it's service in so many ways that can help us accomplish that. Gandhi was a great person of service. And he said something quite profound, I think, especially when we take it in the religious context where we think the way of God is often through a savior. He said that the only way to God is through service. The only way to God is through service. And just this week, preparing this talk, I kind of argued with that idea. Now, there's other ways to God than service. But I realized that I was kind of limiting my idea of what the word service meant. When I really saw that the word service didn't just mean helping others, but it means moving beyond that little I that I convinced myself that I am, to identify with a more universal I, which doesn't just include myself, but that can include everybody, that is truly inclusive. When I am living from that greater I, I'm really living in service. And what am I serving? That greater I, that greater yet to be, that dignity, that truth, that integrity, which we believe to be the sacred truth of all people, no matter what their faith, what their background, how great they are, or what a big stinker they are. It's all there. And when I am being of service and moving to that higher aspect of I am connected the best I can with that which I call God, that presence. And I think it's so important to remember that no matter how broken you may feel, how challenged your life has seemed to become, that you can always be of service. Don't let anything ever hold you back from being of service. Mother Teresa, who I guess we get to call Saint Teresa now, tells a harrowing story about her work in Calcutta and being told about a family of 7 who's greatly malnourished and starving. And she takes rice over to the house, and she's kind of horrified at the sight of this family. It really breaks her heart. And she gives the mother the rice, and she immediately begins to cook half of it, and the other half she puts in her pocket. And Mother Teresa asks what she's doing with the rice, and she says, "My neighbor has a family too, and they too are starving." And Mother Teresa shares in sharing this story that she wasn't struck that the woman was bringing rice to her neighbor, because in her mind, the poor are usually actually the most generous and thoughtful among us. What surprised her is that someone who could be suffering to such a great degree could be aware and want to heal someone else's suffering. I think it's a beautiful story and a beautiful point for all of us. That no matter what you're going through, or no matter how limited you're feeling, you can be a presence. You can be a help. Whether that's picking up a shovel or that's just listening to someone. Each of us has the ability to be of service. Does that mean if you're on your 10th breakup in 10 months that you should become a relationship counselor? No. We should do whatever helps us connect with that greater I, that greater self that we can be. But when we do, I think we're really finding and connecting with that aspect of wholeness that is the truth of who we are. How do we be of service? I think one of the ways that we keep ourselves from being of service in the world is we try to convince ourselves that the problems of the world are overwhelming, that they're just too much and no one can do anything about them. And I think it's so important, and I don't mean to sound foo-foo in saying this, that the biggest way that many of us can learn to be of greater service in the world is to learn to accept and acknowledge the problems in the world, in our country, in our communities, without trying to push them away and making them problems that aren't our own. You know, I catch myself doing this at times. I'll be listening to the news, and I'll hear a suicide bombing in Turkey, 30 people dead. And I'll say, oh, that's horrible that happened way over there. Way over there. Didn't really have anything to do with me, but way over there. And so I'll kind of excuse it. my heart won't be as broken as it should. Or I'll hear about people starving in other countries, and I'll say, that's so awful that things are going on over there. Or I'll hear about a young person getting murdered in an inner city where there's a lot of violence, where it's different than the community that I live in. And I may even at times excuse that. That's so awful that things are like that there. When to me, sometimes the best thing that I can do, it doesn't always mean getting up and being of help or going to a rally or even buying food, although I like to do those things. It just means being willing to accept that that problem is my problem too. That every life out there matters because we all share the same life, and every life is valuable. I'm inspired, however, by someone we're going to hear a little bit later. His name is John, and he started the group that we've been tithing our church money to, called Help to Humanity. And John will share a little bit of his story with you a little bit later. But what I read about John that I so respect is he talks about going to Kenya on a volunteer trip. And I'm having a Mr. Rogers moment of mine while I'm working here, while I'm talking to you. But he talks about going to Kenya on a volunteer mission and how he went there thinking it would serve him himself. But in meeting the children and the people there, he got really inspired, so inspired and feeling connected with them that he came back and decided that he wanted to help however he could. And so he got some friends together and he started making soap in his college dorm room, which I believe was at Chapman, or was it somewhere else, John? At Chapman. And now he is the CEO of this magnificent organization that helps the children in Kenya. And I know sometimes we have technical difficulties here, but I'm going to give it a shot. Sorry, that was hard to read, but let's hear it for John and his great group. And I really do think if we can just begin to acknowledge some of the problems around us, not trying to fix them, if when we're in that place of acknowledgement, that we can really begin to listen and converse and open our minds and our hearts to some of those creative solutions that can come forward in our lives. And that's the other aspect of service that I want to touch before we close today, is that there's also the service which means just doing the best we can to realize that there's plenty to do right in front of us. Through being a better listener, or just being a presence, being willing to hear someone's story, being willing to compliment someone, being willing to heal your own life so that you can be a presence for those that you love around you. I love something the great Nelson Mandela said. He said, "Millions of people are trapped in the prison of poverty. It is time to set them free. Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that great generation." To me, this isn't just a statement that applies to the world, but it applies to our own lives. That you can be that difference, not just for yourself, but perhaps loved ones around you that are struggling as well. Service isn't just a great volunteer opportunity, but I really think that it is, oh boy, what happened here? Oh, that virus thing. Well, hold on a second. Check this one out too. This is from StoryCorps, which some of you are aware of. It is a story of two sanitation workers, and they are real life people. They just happen to be animated for the story.
Maybe you could read the pamphlets, because I've heard this.
It's okay. As you go straight into it.
Oh, okay.
Everybody just come out just to talk to you.
People will say, oh, good morning, Israel. Good morning, Eddie. You want a cup of coffee? You want lunch?
And the nuns kissing us too. We had nuns on the route. You know, I never had that before.
The younger guys would ask me, how did you get that? It's just a little good morning. Have a nice weekend. Hey, you look great today. I can do 14 tons of garbage. I can't lift a baby carriage off the stuff and carry it down, or hold someone's baby when they went to get their car.
The garbage ain't going nowhere. You know, the garbage will be there half hour from now and now. So when you get it, you get it.
He made a statement one day that he does all of the work and I do all the talking.
It came out wrong.
Look how he's getting at it. It just came out wrong. When I first came to the job, there was one old time I remember Gordy Flo, his name was. One day he stopped the truck. He tells me, Angelo, you look down this block first. See all the sidewalks are all crowded up with garbage? I didn't think nothing of it. My father always told me to respect my elders. Get to the end of the block, and he stops me again. Get out of the truck. Look back. Nice and clean, right? People who walk on the sidewalk, guys can make deliveries. Be proud of yourself.
The day that people learned that you were going to retire, we went maybe a block or 2 blocks, and 6 people came up to him saying, you're crazy. What am I going to do when you leave?
I'm a little bit of a marshmallow anyway, but I never thought my last day would be so emotional for me.
He's crying, they're crying, I'm crying, watching them cry. I've been very lucky because it's the best part I ever had. We used to try to take the same vacation and try to have the same day off. And I miss my partner.
I feel the same way, Eddie. I'll be honest with you. I miss it terribly. I'm like that little kid looking out the window now when I hit a truck. I think I could have done another 31 years.
Two things that I love about that story. The first is the idea it doesn't matter if you're a garbage collector or a street sweeper or a retired grandparent or a minister. All of us can use those roles to be of greater service in our lives. The second thing is I love that idea that he says that the garbage will still be there. It's a great analogy for our own personal lives too. Trust me, the garbage will still be there. The trash will still be there, our issues will still be there, our problems will still be there. We may get through them, which is great, but it doesn't matter because who you are is so much more than your garbage. Who you are is so much bigger than your issues. You are a child of God. And when you embrace that greater I that you are and choose to be a greater presence for it and others in your life, you can not only transform yourself, but you can transform that humanity around you. So I encourage you to embrace a larger life through service, to embrace your whole life and the responsibility that comes with that, which means to live your life wholly. So thank you so much for your time this morning. Thanks for being here.